To finish our discussion about Chapter 12 on sampling, we're going to talk today about bias. Bias is bad. You've probably heard this word before, but we'll define it for you. I do want to contrast bias with sampling error. Remember, I don't like the word sampling error. I prefer to call it sampling variability. Error makes me feel like I've done something wrong, but this is not that kind of error. This is okay. Sampling variability happens. We see different results just because we're sampling, right? Hopefully we're sampling randomly. So the little differences we see, the difference between my sample and your sample, is just variability because we didn't happen to pick the same people. This is expected and it is okay. There's nothing wrong with sampling error. That's why I like to call it sampling variability. Bias, on the other hand, this is what we don't want. Bias is any systematic failure to represent the population. Remember, our goal is that our sample represents the population. We want our estimate, our statistic, to be really close to the parameter or the truth. That can't happen if we didn't represent the population. So it comes from how we sample. And I'd like to give you just a few examples of bad. Okay, ways you're going to end up with bias for sure. So here are some examples of bad samples. This is not a comprehensive list. You should definitely read your textbook. Okay, it has more examples. But these are just some of my favorites. Volunteers. That's a for sure way to get an unfair result. Volunteers usually have strong opinions. I really enjoy listening to radio shows, but oftentimes I'll see something like, oh, well, on our Facebook survey, we found that 72% of people think that ice cream is really cool. Well, guess what? Like on Facebook, the only people that are going to bother to come and answer that survey are people who really care. And in this case, it might be people who specifically listen to that radio show. So volunteers, not going to be a good sample. They're going out of their way to answer the question. Convenient samples. Okay? It's just what it sounds like. It's convenient to get those people. Imagine if I was asking about school lunch and I asked people right outside the lunchroom, what do you think about school lunch? And I asked them as they're walking out. I'm not going to get a fair assessment of how our school feels. Because guess what? Some of you don't eat school lunch. You hate it so badly that you go somewhere else. I'm missing those opinions. This is the reason why all internet surveys are worthless. When I talk about those Facebook surveys, that's totally convenient. Not everyone gets on Facebook. Oh, I know that's a horrible thought. Not everyone gets on Facebook. So if I'm asking a question on Facebook, I'm already limiting my audience. Okay, that's convenient and it's not fair. Undercoverage. One example would be phone surveys in the middle of the day. Okay, we call it undercoverage because we're not covering all of our options. In the middle of the day, who are you going to find at home? You might find some stay-at-home moms. You might find some retired people. You're going to miss people like, oh, my husband and I, who are both in school and working. We're not home to answer the phone in the middle of the day. So we're not getting adequate coverage of our population, right? We're missing people. These next four are actually all examples of what's called response bias, but I like to be a little more specific than that. So the way we word a survey question could introduce bias. For example, if I say, guess what? Our school will get extra money if we serve vegetables in all of our school lunches. Do you think we should have vegetables? See how I'm like persuading by the way I ask the question? Okay, that's not fair. That introduces bias. This one is really common if you start reading surveys. The order the questions are in could even have an influence. The person doing the interview. Could you imagine if I wanted to find out whether or not students at Granger High School cheat on their tests, and I have all the teachers ask? I'm going to get very different responses than if I had, oh, maybe another student ask that question. And faulty instruments. Okay, we're used to talking about samples as being surveys. Samples could be other things. Okay, I made up a silly story about measuring the weights of dolphins. If my scale is broken, right? My weights will not be accurate. So that would introduce bias. Again, those are just a few examples, things for us to think about. So what are you supposed to do if you realize that you have bias? Don't go out and collect more data. Okay, if I am using this survey that says, oh, hey, our school will get more money if we serve vegetables in our school lunch. Should we serve vegetables? The question is faulty. Asking more people will not help. This is terrible, but it might help you remember. More crap is still crap. Okay? If I'm getting bias in my survey, going out and getting more bias is not going to solve anything. So we really can't fix bias after the fact. Instead, we need to avoid it to begin with. Okay? We do that by testing out survey questions. You know, giving it to a small sample. They sometimes even do like groups where people come in and discuss the question. What did you think about when you're answering this question? Get a second opinion. Real scientists, people who do surveys, they spend a lot of time making sure their surveys are good before they go out and gather the data. So that's really where our focus should be. Avoid bias to begin with. Make sure, that's why we randomly sample in those 4 ways we discussed last time. So remember, bias is bad.